the unsinkable ship that sank and led around 1,500 people to their death. The Titanic is one of the worst sea disasters in history. And while all of us know about it, there are some unknown facts about the Titanic as well, which we are listing here. Number 24. Alcohol to the rescue. While the number of deaths in the Titanic were more because of the freezing waters, there was one man who was found by rescue teams 2 hours after the ship had sunk. He was Charles Joughin, the chief baker on the Titanic, and he reportedly drank a lot of alcohol. That was the reason why his body could tolerate the freezing waters for that long, as the alcohol helped keep his body warm. So, some good does come out of alcohol, it seems. Number 23. The first Titanic movie. Did you know that James Cameron was not the first person to make a film on the Titanic? It was actually made just a month after the great ship sunk and was called Saved from the Titanic. What is even more interesting is that the film was made using one of the actors who actually was on the ship and managed to survive. Here comes number 22. If you want to see more videos like this one, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click on the notification bell. Number 22. Dog survivors. The Titanic carried a lot of people, and many of them were extremely affluent. And, as such, they would obviously want to take their beloved dogs with them on such an epic journey. There was a total of 12 dogs on board the Titanic, and while no one would have given them much of a chance of survival given that people were dying in the thousands, 3 of them managed to survive the accident. Number 21. Finding the wreckage. The Atlantic Ocean is a huge body of water, and it is not easy to find anything that it claims. So was the case with the Titanic as well, even though it was one of the largest ships ever. The search for the wreckage of the Titanic was something that was carried out a number of times because there was so much to be learned from it, and not to mention there would be more than enough expensive goods there. But it was only found 73 years later. Number 20. Titanic song. When the song My Heart Will Go On came out in the movie Titanic, it won hearts all over the world. But there were some people who did not quite connect with the song, and perhaps the most surprising of them is Kate Winslet, who plays the lead role in the film. In fact, she went on to say she felt like puking when she heard the song. Guess there's no pleasing everyone. Number 19. Iceberg. Turns out, Titanic had some of the worst luck possible because it was not that easy to run into an iceberg, especially one that could actually sink a ship. In fact, modern ships are much more likely to come across an iceberg than the Titanic was. Number 18. Historical iceberg. While the iceberg that sank the Titanic has gained much notoriety since then, many people fail to realize that the iceberg was also pretty important in itself. It is estimated that the iceberg had broken off almost 2,000 years ago and had been drifting along since then. It was just bad luck that it was brought into a collision course with the Titanic. Number 17. Engineering support. The Titanic was a huge ship, and obviously there were a lot of engines on board. And when that happens, you have to have the engineers to see that it all functions smoothly. In all, there were about 30 engineers on board the ship, but none of them managed to escape. Rather, they did not even try to escape, because they stayed behind to keep the power on for as long as possible so that others would have a fighting chance. Number 16. Lifeboat problems. While many blame inadequate lifeboats as the reason why there was so much death during the sinking of the Titanic, the actual fact may come as a surprise. The lifeboats actually had the capacity to save at least half of the people on board, but unfortunately, only 1/3 of them could make it in time to be rescued. Number 15. Honeymoons. The Titanic was one of the biggest events of its time. There was a lot of anticipation and excitement, and getting on board was not the easiest of things. And, as such, the views that it would offer on the journey were simply fantastic. So, many young couples decided to celebrate their honeymoon on the ship. In fact, there were 13 couples celebrating their honeymoon, and before you conspiracy theorists start blaming the unlucky number 13 for the disaster, let us just say that we already thought of it. Number 14. Expensive rooms. While we all know that there were quite a few rich and powerful on board the Titanic, there were some who were richer than others, because the most expensive rooms in the Titanic would cost over $100,000 today. Imagine that! We wonder how many people would cough up that much for a boat ride today. Number 13. Design excellence. The Titanic was considered unsinkable. The reason was that in case that any calamity struck, the ship would stay afloat even if 4 of them filled up with water. However, it was the misfortune of those on board that when the iceberg hit the ship, it tore holes in 6 of the compartments, causing them to fill up with water. Number 12. Unique accident. We all know that icebergs are found in the water, and that they are extremely dangerous. After all, one of them was able to sink the unsinkable ship. But did you know that accidents because of icebergs are extremely rare? In fact, the Titanic is the only known ocean liner in history that has ever been sunk by an iceberg. Number 11. Saved by chocolate. All of us have tasted Hershey's chocolate, and they are absolutely delicious. But what many of you may not know is that the founder of Hershey's chocolate, Milton Hershey, was supposed to be on the Titanic. In fact, it was only a last-minute engagement that led him to canceling his reservation. Well, let us be thankful for that engagement, because it would have made the world a lot less sweeter. Number 10. Dedicated reporting. The sinking of the Titanic was one of the worst disasters of all time, and it was something that people wanted to know about. Perhaps that was the reason why the New York Times devoted 75 pages to the coverage of the disaster in the first week of the accident. Number 9. Averting disaster. There were many factors which contributed towards the sinking of the Titanic, and while the iceberg was obviously the biggest one, it could have been avoided. When the iceberg was first spotted, there was a 30-second delay before the order to change course was given. It has been calculated that had that delay been avoided, the Titanic probably would not have sunk. But let us just take that as a lesson that every second matters. Number 8. Lost souls. To this date, the Titanic remains one of the worst ship disasters in history. There were reportedly over 2,224 people on board, including the passengers and crew, and the casualties were over 1,500. But what was worse was that most of those could not even be given a proper funeral because only 336 bodies were recovered. The rest were lost in the ocean. Number 7. Costly movie. When the film Titanic was made, it was a great spectacle. The movie was wonderful to look at and the story was emotional for sure. But what you might be surprised to learn is that the actual cost of making the movie was more than the total cost of the making of the ship itself. Number 6. Dedicated musicians. One of the most heart-wrenching scenes in the movie Titanic was the musicians who decided to continue playing just so that the others could have a little hope. And it would really warm your heart knowing that the bit about the musicians was based on an actual fact. They literally kept playing for hours as the ship was sinking for the benefit of the people. Number 5. Decorative smoke. When you look at the pictures of the Titanic, you will notice that 4 huge smokestacks were there. But did you know that one of them had no real purpose? It was built just to make the ship look better. Guess 3 is actually a crowd. Number 4. Missed opportunity. A lot of us usually ignore drills of any kind because we think that disasters will never happen to us. Thankfully, that is true most of the times, but it doesn't hurt to be prepared. The Titanic actually had a lifeboat drill planned on the day it sank, but it was canceled for some reason. We wonder how many people would have been saved had that drill been conducted properly. Number 3. Coal mine. As we have mentioned before, the Titanic was one of the biggest ships ever, and anything of that size requires a lot of power to move. But it might come as a surprise that the engines of the Titanic were so huge that it took 176 men just to shovel coal into the furnaces. Size does matter. Number 2. Newsworthy. The ship had many of the elite on board, and as you might know, they like to keep themselves pretty well informed. So it would just not do for the Titanic to get stale newspaper delivered by some ship. The solution was to have a newspaper called the Atlantic Daily News, which was printed there itself. Talk about a luxury liner. Number 1. Coincidence. If you are one of those who believe that the future can be foretold, you probably would be very interested in this. 14 years before the Titanic sank, Morgan Robertson wrote a book called Futility. It also featured a ship called Titan, which hit an iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean. But that is not where the similarity ends. Even in the book, the ship did not have enough lifeboats for the thousands of people on board. So how did Robertson predict events in such fashion 14 years before the disaster? We don't know. but it certainly is freaky. These little facts do give a different perspective on the most famous ship disaster, doesn't it? And if you happen to know any more such interesting tidbits about the Titanic, do let us know in the comment section below. And do remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel.